Jai Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Bihari Gopijana Ballabha Grivadari Jaya Grivadari Gopijana Ballabha Grivadari Jaya Grivadari Yasodanandana Radha Dhanaranjana Jaya Radha Dhanaranjana Yasodanandana Radha Dhanaranjana Jaya Radha Dhanaranjana Yamuna Dhiravarachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Yamuna Dhiravarachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Gopijana Ballabha Grivadari Jaya Grivadari Gopijana Ballabha Grivadari Jaya Grivadari Gopirana Vallabha Grivardhari Jaya Grivardhari. Yasodanandana Radha-dana-ranjana Jaya Radha-dana-ranjana. Yasodanandana Radha-dana-ranjana Jaya Radha-dana-ranjana. Yamunatiravarachari Jaya Kunja Vihari. Yamunatiravarachari Jaya Kunja Vihari. Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Brahmadakacharya Asadhara Sadhu Shri Shriman. His Divine Grace Lacey Bhaktivedanta Swami Raj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande Haribo Slava Zarani Bhakta Slava Shri Guru Shri Grangi Vam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhute Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Sarasatundeve Gauravani Vicharne Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskadyade Sadarne. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Prijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shiva Sakans Vitam Scha Hey Krishna Karna Sindhu Dinabando Dagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Prishubhanu Sudha Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pranitananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivastadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 18, King Ayati regains his youth, beginning with text 24. Thereafter, when the learned king returned to his palace, Devyani returned home crying and told her father, Shukracharya, about all that had happened because of Sharmista. She told how she had been thrown into the well but was saved by the king. Text 25. Dharmana Bhagavan Kavya Parohityam Vigarhayan Stuvan Vritim Kapotim Duhitra Sayayo Purat Dharmana Bhagavan Kavya Parohityam Vigarhayan Stuvan Vritim Kapotim Duhitra Sayayo Purat. Bhagavan Kavya Parohityam Vigarhayan Stuvan Vritim Kapotim Duhitra Sayayo Purat. Dharmana Bhagavan Kavya Parohityam Vigarhayan Stuvan Vritim Kapotim Duhitra Sayayo Purat. Dharmana Bhagavan Kavya Zavaya Stuvavatim Kapotim Duhitra Sayayo Purat. Ladies. Dharmana Bhagavan Kavya Parohityam Vigarhayan Stuvan Vritim Kapotim Duhitra Sayayo Purat. Dharmana, being very unhappy. Bhagavan, the most powerful. Kavya, Shukracharya. Parohityam, the business of priesthood. Vigarhayan, condemning. Stuvan, praising. Vritim, the profession. Cha, and Kapotim, of collecting grains from the field. Duhitra, with his daughter. Saha, he. Shukracharya. Yayati, Yayo went. Purat, from his own residence. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. As Sukracharya listened to what had happened to Devayani, his mind was very much aggrieved, condemning the profession of priesthood and praising the profession of uncha-vriti, collecting grains from the fields. He left home with his daughter. Purport. When a Brahmana adopts the profession of a kapota, or a pigeon, he lives by collecting grains from the field. This is called uncha-vriti. A Brahmana who takes this uncha-vriti profession is called first class because he depends completely on the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and does not beg from anyone. Although the profession of begging is allowed for a Brahmana or a sannyasi, one does better if he can avoid such a profession, completely depend on the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead for maintenance. Sukracharya was certainly very sorry that because of his daughter's complaint, he had to go to his disciple to beg some mercy, which he was obliged to do because he had accepted the profession of priesthood. In his heart, Sukracharya did not like his profession, but since he had accepted it, he was obliged to go unwillingly to his disciple and settle the grievance submitted by his daughter. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhute Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vacharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskyadyade Sadharane. This story illustrates how no one is actually the master, that everyone is a servant. One may take the title of master in the material world, but ultimately one takes that title as a servant, because that's our nature. That's our dharma. Sanatana dharma is that of service. The living entity is eternally a servant. Jivara Srupahoy Krishnera Nityada. And ultimately one is a servant of Krishna. We may think that I'm a servant of this body. We may think I'm a servant of my mind, because people usually don't think like that. They think I am the body. But one may serve the body or the mind, or may serve others, family, whatever. But ultimately one is, even if one is serving the senses, that's indirectly as service to Krishna. Because even Maya is also a servant of Krishna. Krishna, when Srila Vyasadeva was meditating and he saw Krishna, and he said, bhakti-yogena manasi samyak prahinitam mule paishat purusham something. Yet tad. Do we have Bhagavatam, the first canto? Bhakti-yogena manasi samyak pranihitam male paisha purusham purnam maya chattadapashrayam. I got it. Anyhow, you can just put it here. That when Srila Vyasadeva was told by his spiritual master Narada Muni to meditate on the Supreme, he sat in meditation, and what he saw was by bhakti-yogena manasi, when he was actually connected with Krishna through Krishna consciousness, samyak pranihitam male, without any covering of the illusory energy. Then he said, bhakti-yogena manasi samyak pranihitam male, apaishat purusham purnam. He saw the Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead, maya chattara apashrayam. And then he saw in the back of Krishna was Maya, taking shelter of Krishna. So Maya is not independent of Krishna. When the living entity wants to forget Krishna, then Maya takes over and gives one all opportunities to act as if one is separated from Krishna. One gets the material body, material mind, material senses, material conceptions, and then one dovetails one's desires utilizing the intelligence and the mind in order to perform different activities for sense gratification. All with the idea of imagining that we're somehow or another independent controllers and enjoyers in the material world. But that's called Maya Chat Tat Apashraya, which is simply illusory. So here we find someone like Srila Vyasadeva. I'm sorry, not Vyasadeva. We have Shukracharya, a very powerful Brahmana, practically speaking, in charge of material opulence in the universe. And yet, his daughter, childish, wound up cursing her girlfriend because her girlfriend dared to put on her clothes by accident that was worthy of criticism, and then she wound up in a well. Her daughter, less intelligent, winds up controlling the person who's controlling most of the opulence in the material world. So what place are we in right now? Who's actually controlling here? How profound is the wisdom behind the material universe and the persons who are in charge of it? And Sukracharya, however powerful he may be, on the whim of his daughter, has to go to beg from his disciple. How embarrassing. So-called disciple, he has to beg. And his disciple has to follow his spiritual master, not out of any kind of love or appreciation, but a fear of being cursed by him. With friends like that, you don't need enemies. If you don't do as I say, then we curse you to go to hell. That's not exactly bhakti-yoga. But that's the material world. However exalted one may find oneself in the material existence, still one is simply a servant of so many other people's whims. Therefore, devarsha bhutatma nrimputrinam nekinkaro yaksharnam sharanyam. That if one becomes a devotee of Krishna, then one is no longer obliged to all these other personalities as their servant. Devas, the demigods, the rishis, the ghosts of the ordinary people. Devarsha bhutatmari pitrinam, the forefathers. Nikinkaro yaksharnam sharanyam. One is rajan. One is no longer obliged to be servants of people's whimsical desires if one takes shelter of Krishna. Because even if there's some fault in our service to Krishna, Krishna will still try to help us and protect us. But if there's some fault, like here, little fault in one's relationships between disciple and guru, between friends and friends, whatever, so many problems. And the problem goes on for thousands of years. It's not like we have a little problem, it's solved in a couple of days because we don't have enough memory to remember exactly what the problem was. But there, when you're more exalted, then you can remember for thousands of years. And at the end, you wind up realizing you just wasted your time for thousands of years, engaged in sense gratification, which never brought you any real satisfaction, but simply gave you enough intelligence after some time to realize that that's what it was. It was a waste of time. But that's great realization. Still, we'll find out the wonderful story of Devayani and the romantic affair she had with Yayati, and Sarmishta, the triangle, the normal triangle of every love affair. And then we'll find out that ultimately one should simply become Krishna conscious and save oneself so much trouble. So let's go on. Any questions so far? In any case, if we can't learn by hearing, which most of us we can't hear, because we can't learn by hearing because we don't hear. We don't know how to hear properly. when we hear Bhagavatam, what can we expect? They're talking about Sukracharya, Venus, and Yayati ruling this whole world, and Devyani, Charmista being the king, Rishabha's, Parva's daughter with thousands of servants. To us it sounds like a fairy tale. Matter of fact, most of the Bhagavatam sounds like a fairy tale. Therefore, without actually at least theoretically accepting it on that it could be a possibility, we don't have to blindly accept it because we have no capacity to blindly accept it anyhow. We won't accept it because we don't have enough experience by realization to understand, to put it into any kind of real perspective. The only experience we have is whatever we had from the materialistic culture we were brought up with, plus some experience by chanting Hare Krishna, some other perspective on things, by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, but we have no experience of such a kingdom. Like they have these movies now, like the Avatar. And people, they went to see this movie, and they have a sequence to it too. And it's like this mystical world where everything's effulgent, and everything's beautiful, people are powerful, and people think, well, that's where I want to be. Of course, they have a few problems there too, like people get eaten by the plants, but anyhow, they have no conception of what the spiritual world, well, they have some conception of the spiritual world, and people they want to be there because that's where they came from, a world like that. But now we're in this world, and every time we hear about such a world, it's only another world, except for the Bhagavatam, is some fairy tale. And therefore anything outside our realm of experience is usually equated with a fairy tale. We've been trained up like that. But at least one should understand, theoretically, that I'm actually not this body. That awakens a little bit of our intelligence, that my body is always changing, but I'm not changing. So therefore, what is actually my conception? How valid it is? I don't even know who I am. I'm the consciousness within this body, this ever-changing body, and I have no direct experience of my own self except for the fact that I know I exist. And therefore, all this philosophy, all this perspective, all these ideas that float around the material world, they're all wrong. Because even the most basic thing of our eternality is not even taken into account. And what to speak of a controller, as if the controller could only make a world like we're living in right now, and that's the absolute truth. Ljubljana is the highest realm. There's nothing higher. Maybe Timisoara is a little higher, but or New Delhi. Anyhow, we think that this is the highest realm of existence. But actually it's just our imagination that we're identifying ourselves with this very temporary material world, and the reality is that we're eternal souls, and what Krishna could create is beyond our capacity to understand at the present moment. And therefore, at least theoretically, we can accept that this might be true and might derive some lesson from it. And the lesson is not try to become born in Treta Yuga. The lesson is, even if one is born in Treta Yuga, we're going to have the same problems there. The whole material world, from Brahma down to the meanest insect, is just an imitation. Everyone is trying to imitate Radha and Krishna in some way, whether in Brahma Loka or in Indra Loka or in Ljubljana. Everyone wants a romantic relationship, and this simply results in some kind of frustration at the end. If one is not Krishna conscious. If one is Krishna conscious, one gradually realizes, I'm not Tarzan, she's not Jane. I'm not Mickey Mouse, and she's not Minnie Mouse. I'm just Krishna's eternal servant, and so is she. And so are my children. And even my dog is Krishna's eternal servant. And let's chant Hare Krishna together so we can get out of this misconception and all the implications that happen when we misidentify ourselves with these gross and subtle material bodies. Let's get out of it and go back to our real world where we can actually do something useful for ourselves and others. In the meantime, if one can learn this lesson, so even if one is married and has a nice family, one can make the best use of it. Engage in Krishna's service and not think, as will later on will be explained to us, that simply by sense gratification we're going to make anyone happy. Without some sense gratification may be there, but it's not the objective or the path to happiness. The path to happiness is to become conscious of Krishna and therefore gradually become aloof from the urges of the mind and senses by experiencing a higher taste. In any case, Bhagavatam is full of nice stories to keep us entertained. Otherwise, Bhagavatam could have been a very small book. Just surrender to Krishna. Any questions? No. It has to have full of wonderful stories so that we can become a little attracted. If it was just some kind of Bhagavatam was some girl next door threw someone into the sewer, and then she went home and complained to her father, and then whatever. It has to be a little bit extraordinary. Otherwise, there's nothing really to hear about. So let me continue on. King Vrishabharva understood that Sukracharya was coming to chastise or curse him. Consequently, before Sukracharya came to his house, Vrishabharva went out and fell down in the street at the feet of his guru and satisfied him, checking his wrath. Little culture. You know someone's going to come and curse you. You don't go out, hit him with a club before he can do it. No, there's some actually culture that's in the Vedic culture that in order to satisfy someone, you fall at their feet. Not you say, let's go outside and we'll solve it, we'll settle it there. No, you fall at the Guru's feet and you beg his mercy, and then their hearts may soften, because everyone wants a good surrendered soul. The whole material world is everyone's looking for someone to surrender to them. So if someone surrenders, even out of fear of becoming chastised, then it's appreciated. Otherwise, everyone's trying to say, who are you to tell me what to do? Do you know who I am? No, who are you? I don't know either, but anyhow, that's not the point. The point is that you're not anyone to tell me what to do. That's the material existence. That's how everyone thinks. As soon as someone approaches, you're not going to tell me anything, are you? Who are you to tell me? Purport, translation. The powerful Sukracharya was angry for a few moments. But upon being satisfied, he said to Vrishabharva. So Vrishabharva simply offers obeisances on the street, and that satisfies Sukracharya. So you may do so many other things, try to explain this and that, but you simply fall down on the floor, people will become a little bit satisfied. His anger was dissipated. After all, his daughter had thrown his daughter into a well, tried to kill her. A little extreme. She probably would have been arrested and put in jail nowadays. But it was settled in a little bit more friendly way. My dear king, kindly fulfill the desires of Devyani, for she is my daughter. In this world I cannot give her up or neglect her. Purport. Sometimes a great personality like Shukracharya cannot neglect sons and daughters, for sons and daughters by nature dependent on their father, and the father has affection for them. Although Sukracharya knew that the quarrel between Devyani and Samishta was childish, as Devyani's father, he had to side with his daughter. He did not like to do this, but he was obliged to because of affection. He plainly admitted that although he should not have asked the king for mercy for his daughter, because of affection, he could not avoid doing so. So entangling is the material world. As soon as you get involved in it, then you wind up doing things that you don't want to do. We may think we become very powerful, just like Muchakunda. Muchakunda became so powerful, he conquered the whole earth planet, Bhumandala, and then he went to fight for the demigods. We can't imagine how powerful he was. He slept in the cave for thousands of years. But still, he mentions to Krishna, when he saw Krishna, he said that when I came home after the battle, and I came to the queen's palaces in order to get a little satisfaction from them, then I had to fall at their feet for a little bit of sense gratification. So he conquered all the demigods, but he had to fall at the feet of his own wives to get some satisfaction from them. So such is the material world. We may imagine ourselves very powerful, independent controllers, but ultimately we're just puppets in the hands of the illusory energy. Any questions about this? Yes.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for the class. I'm curious. There says that he was obliged to do that because of affection. But I don't know, in my childhood when I make something, I did some mistakes, my parents didn't defend me or something.
They didn't?
Yeah, so it was like they didn't love me or what?
No, in this material world there is no love. But there's some material attachment. So why they did it or not, I mean, it's not that Sukracharya necessarily defended his children under any circumstance, but this is a little extreme. If someone threw you in a well, naked, maybe your parents might defend you at that time. At least they'd try and take you out of the well. So maybe for more minor things, it's a different thing. But this was something a little bit more serious, although it was childish. I mean, just because someone takes your clothes, you don't usually curse them. And then because you've been offended, you don't usually strip someone naked and throw them in a well. So this was a little bit more, it was childish, but it was also serious.
Yeah, it looks childish, but it involves so many and big personalities, you know. So.
Well, they have nothing to do. I mean, they're big the bigger the personality, the more the false ego is there. I'm so and so. I'm Devyani. I'm the daughter of Sukracharya, who rules over the universe in terms of Venus. I'm in charge of all sense gratification. I'm a great personality. She cursed Kacha. I mean, false ego. It's actually we're directed by our false ego, no matter how big we think we are.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanande.